You've been brought before this here court for the terrible crime of not adopting the metric system.
I plead the 6th.
I believe you mean the 5th.
No, I have the right to a speedy trial, and I want this over with yesterday.
Sir, the international community would like to urge you, genuinely, to join the rest of the world, enter the 21st century, and finally come to terms with the fact that your, shall we say, antiquated measurement system should be retired.
You can take my miles and pounds when you pry 'em out of my 20-degree Fahrenheit dead hands. And for you commies, that's pretty darn cold.
If you've only got quips, then I can assure you this trial will be speedy.
Hold your horses, I got me a defense. Should've been here by now. Sorry I'm late, video editing takes a lot longer than I remembered.
And you are?
I'm the man that's gonna defend the Imperial System. I hope you know what you're doing. Don't worry, you're in good hands. I have an engineering degree. Wait a minute, I thought you was a lawyer. No, and don't call me a lawyer. Before we can really understand why America doesn't use metric, we have to understand why we use units at all. Standards of measure have existed since human beings have grown crops or started civilizations. And they've been invented several times independently throughout history. And although independent, there were some obvious similarities. The Egyptian cubit, used at least 5,000 years ago, was defined as the length from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. The Chinese base measure was the chur, the length of a human hand. The Inca, meanwhile, used the rishra, the distance from fingertip to fingertip with your arm stretched out. In other words, your wingspan. The Andean condor has a wingspan of 2 rishra. You may have realized the human body was the root of all of these measurements. Units are all about describing things in a relatable, communicable way. What human anatomy lacks in consistency, it more than makes up for in ubiquity. Anyone who needed a ruler needed only hold out their hands and feet. It's also no coincidence that the earliest units from around the world were all measures of distance. Besides distance, standard units weren't very important. Distances were easily the largest thing anyone ever needed to measure. How far is Machu Picchu? How vast is your liege lord's domain? Without a standard unit, even a flawed one, it's incredibly difficult to communicate distance. Take weight as a counterexample. Weights were rarely discussed in the abstract. Only relative weights truly mattered, and for that purpose, a simple balance, found at any market, sufficed. Rudimentary units for weight first appeared when people began using large boulders or hunks of metal on their balances. These didn't need to be the same from village to village, so standard units for weight remained highly local, well, at least for large, cheap goods. On the other side of the scale,
please clap.
On the other side of the scale were small, expensive items. The handy village boulder wasn't much use in weighing a handful of silver. Instead of relying on locals wherever they went, merchants brought their own weights with them to ensure consistency. If 2 merchants happened to meet, they could compare their weights. If they didn't match, they knew at least one of them needed to add or remove weight. This system was imperfect, but at least added a bit of officiality and consistency. Compared to the body-positive definition of distance, weight standardization marked the first major leap in measurement. Since weight units developed first for precious metals, it should be no surprise that they coincided with the invention of currency. The two have long been fundamentally linked, like the Mesopotamian shekel. Not only was the shekel a currency, it was a unit of weight as well. Just like Britain's modern currency, the pound sterling, which was once the value of a pound of sterling silver. Today, a pound of sterling is worth 434 pounds sterling. That's right, China, Sweden. Units are rooted in capitalism. Think about that as you debate convicting your noble comrade for his disruption of the global monetary system. Hey, too far. I'd rather get the chair. For thousands of years, regional lengths and local weights were the standard. That is, until empires came along. Empires needed to unify people, and that included standardizing how they measured everything. Perhaps none did it better than the Romans. Roman law dictated units had to be the same across the entire empire. Their units weren't all that different from those that preceded them, they were still based on and named after human body part. Their standard length was the foot, or pes in Latin. For smaller lengths, they used the thumb, or pollex, but more formally it was called the uncia, which was a subtle but important breakthrough, which you can see in the meaning of the word itself. Uncia means a twelfth, and was used not just for length, but also weight and many other things. If you squint your ears, you can probably make out that it's the origin of the words inch and ounce. The revolutionary part of this was the idea of defining units relative to each other. An inch wasn't just the width of any old thumb, it was specifically 1/12 of a foot. In earlier systems, your foot would have been a foot, and your thumb an inch. In the Roman system, it didn't matter how big your thumb was, an inch was 1/12 of your foot. All Roman lengths were merely multiples or fractions of feet. For example, the Roman mile was 5,000 Roman feet. And don't worry, I'll get to why an American mile is 5,280 American feet in a bit, but bear with me for now. This method was true not only for inches and miles, but their standard for weight, the libra, from whence the pound is descended. Hopefully it now makes sense why pound is abbreviated LB. The Romans pounded their feet and stomped their pounds into the psyche of all their subjects. Across Europe and well into Asia and Africa, Roman units spread. So, I think it's fair to say that the American system traces its origins to the Romans. Italy, Romania, would you be so quick to pass judgment on the brave nation upholding Roman traditions? I wonder. The Roman system, as evidenced by its continued use, was left unimproved for centuries. In the end, it took a global empire to expand the work of a continental one. The biggest British contribution to the history of measurement was to make it more convoluted. The British found that the Roman ratios were far too reasonable. Just look at the British mile with its 5,280 feet. Of course, you'd be a right bollock to measure it in such a way. A mile is actually 8 furlongs. A furlong, you ask? Why, that's 10 chains, of course. And a chain? Why, 22 yards, don't be daft. A yard is simply 3 feet. In the end, though, despite the unnecessary intermediate measures, the foot remained the base unit of length. The odd ratios owe mostly to convenience, as strange as that may seem. Dating back to Roman times, 12s and 8s were used because they were easily divided in halves, quarters, or thirds. While 1/3 of a meter gives you an infinitely repeating decimal worth of centimeters, 1/3 of a foot is just 4 inches. What appear as cumbersomely complicated conversions are actually reliably rational ratios. Not buying it? Okay, well, maybe not the chains and the furlongs. But nobody's used those for a long time. The British did make one legitimate improvement to the Roman system. They finally made it truly standard by eliminating the use of feet. As in human feet, not the unit feet. They formally changed the definition of distance to the width of the humble barleycorn. Funnily enough, this wasn't the first time that barleycorns were used as a standard measure. In ancient Mesopotamia, barleycorns were used as currency and as a way to precisely balance out small amounts of silver. This new barleycorn-based system was still a far cry from perfect, since even barleycorns aren't all identical. But those cunning Brits had one last trick up their sleeve. In 1824, King George IV signed into law the first major leap in measurement and standardization in millennia, the Weights and Measures Act of 1824. For the first time in history, units were truly standardized. This is the standard yard of 1760. This was not a yard, it was the yard. The unit itself, and indeed all units of length, were defined by the length of this specific bar of brass. No more inconsistencies, no more guessing. Nothing could go wrong. Objection?
Objection? To yourself?
Yes, Your Honor, there was actually a major flaw in this new system. If your measurement system relies on a single physical object, what happens if you, I don't know, kept it in the Palace of Westminster and then accidentally light the whole thing on fire and lose it? Well, the British found out in 1834 when the Palace of Westminster burned to the ground, taking the standard yard and Britain's entire standard of measurement with it. Oh yeah, they had a similar standard for the pound. Lost that one too. Whoops. There was hardly a chance the British could have foreseen that happening, and absolutely no way to prevent it. Well, there was one way, but it was invented by the French, so right out as an option. In the midst of the French Revolution, the French found time to invent an entirely new measurement system. This system was not based on the body, barleycorns, or even brass. Rather, by the universe itself. In 1791, many of the era's greatest mathematicians, like Laplace, Lagrange, and Lavoisier, gave birth to the metric system. The metric base unit of length, the meter, was defined as 1/10,000,000th the Earth's circumference. As long as the Earth didn't burn down in a fire, we couldn't lose the meter. The other major development of this system was decimalization. 12 and 8 are useful for mental math, but 10 is far more convenient for science and engineering. Obviously, mathematicians loved the metric system, at least until they got the guillotine. Sorry, Lavoisier. Common folk, on the other hand, were slow to adopt it. So far, it may seem like the history of units was a linear, steady progression towards standardization. That has been a bit of an oversimplification on my part. In 1838, just in Switzerland, there were no fewer than 37 different units of length, 70 measures of volume, and 146 measures of weight. After Napoleon reverted France to Roman-style governance, he reinstituted the old Roman feet and pounds for good measure. This time, though, in what was without a doubt the worst bastardization of units ever conceived, the French foot was defined as 1/3 of a meter, and a pound as half a kilogram. Absolutely cursed. The metric system continued to languish for more than half a century, but by 1870, the need for an international standard became too much. The rapid advancement of science, industry, and international trade demanded it. Thousands of old units from around the world had to be replaced, from Brazil to Bali and from Tokyo to Timbuktu. Leading the charge for the global adoption of the metric system were 15 countries, among them France, of course, and the United States. You heard me right. My client, so belittled by the international community, was in fact an early adopter and proponent of the metric system, officially adopting it in 1866. That is nearly 2 decades before the United Kingdom. The United States, in the name of freedom, simply didn't make the metric system mandatory. It was assumed Americans would naturally adopt metric on their own. Eventually. Thanks to consistent attempts in the decades since, we have gotten as far as liters of Coke and grams of... never mind. In reality, the metric system is actually quite common in the US. Sure, we use miles, feet, and inches, but those are all just length. The base unit is still just the yard. All others are derived units, simply multiples and combinations of base units. There are only 7 base measures used in either the American or metric system. You've got the ampere, a measure of electric current, the candela, a measure of intensity of light, the mole, a measure of atomic substance, and the second, a measure of time. These 4 base units are actually the exact same in American or metric. 4 out of the 7 base units match. Unfortunately, the 3 base units that don't agree are by far the most commonly used: length, mass, and temperature. That also affects many derived units, like speed or unit distance per unit time. Or weight, units mass times units distance divided by units time squared. Even though most base units agree, it hardly matters if nobody cares about candelas, moles, and amperes. Although the US was an early, albeit reserved, adopter of the metric system, it's likely to keep using the American customary system for the foreseeable future. Britain, Australia, South Africa, and many other longtime holdouts against the metric system eventually passed laws making it mandatory. In the end, though, with all of its annoying conversion shenanigans, the US system is harmless. Going against the grain does have its drawbacks. Unit shenanigans cost us the $125 million Mars Climate Orbiter, which tragically crashed into Mars at around 450 miles per hour. It wasn't because US units are bad, mind you, rather because the probe was built partly with metric and partly with American customary, without anyone realizing the unit inconsistency. As an American engineer, I'll say that yes, there are times when I wish I didn't have to use TWIPs, slugs, or PECs, but to that I say, 1, we have a general grasp of metric, and 2, I made one of those units up and it's not slug.
I believe your ramblings have gone on long enough. Juror number 6 has had 3 attempted coups since you started.
I have just one final point, Your Honor. My client cannot be convicted, for they technically use the metric system.
I will not have such a profane remark in my assembly.
The US customary system has absolutely no disagreements with metric.
Go on.
In 1966, the US National Bureau of Standards redefined the yard as precisely 0.9144 meters. Likewise, they defined a pound as 0.45359237 kilograms. Also, before you ask, there is a unit of weight called the pound, but there is also a unit of mass called the pound, or pound mass, or avoirdupois pound. That is the unit defined as a fraction of a kilogram. US units are all just derived units of the metric system, no different from kilometers per hour or kilograms per liter. And with that, I rest my case.
Ugh, finally. Jury, do you have a verdict? What the? Where did they...
Yeah, so I remembered I'm on that old security council, and I just vetoed this whole thing. So all that debating? All that editing? This whole video was for nothing? Nah, it weren't for nothing. You sure convinced me. Really? That the history of units is complex? And that the American customary system exists as a fascinating... Nah, I'm gonna cut you off there. No, you convinced me. The only thing worse than a supranational bureaucrat is an engineer with a microphone. Hey, you made it to the epilogue. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed or learned anything, please give the video a like and the channel a follow. If you really liked it, come join our Discord. Also, I'd hate to leave you on an educational cliffhanger about TWIPs, slugs, and PECs. A TWIP is 1/1440th of an inch and is used in making typefaces. A slug is a unit of mass, approximately 32 pounds at standard gravity, and a PEC is 8 dry pints. That's right, they were all real. I'll admit, no one uses TWIPs or PECs, but you do run into a slug from time to time. On behalf of all of us at Studio Alpaca, thank you, and we'll see you next time.